Welcome back to my channel. As you know, Aipac is a bipartisan pro-Israel action committee which stands with those who stand with Israel. Now, it is the largest pro-Israel PAC in America and contributed more resources directly to candidates than any other PAC. I have been sharing videos about Aipac and how this lobbying group advocates pro-Israel policies to the legislative and executive branches of the United States. And in this video, you will hear people saying that Aipac has disproportionate influence over the US government and policy. Those who criticize Israeli policy risk being tagged as anti-Israel or anti-Semitic. Now, they also go on to talk about how Aipac does exercise very real influence of the US government, especially when it comes to politicians. Like, they don't need to be bribed to support Israel because they already did that. Most of them are Zionists. A letter that was sent to the FBI in the 1950s pops up as it highlights how the World Zionist Organization at London, England, submitted a proposition along the following lines to Great Britain. Now, it proposed that the organization use its influence among the world jury to bring the United States of America into World War I on the side of the Allies, provided that Great Britain, in exchange for this service, would set aside territory well known as Palestine. Guys, this is really an interesting video, so check these videos out. I will be right back.
Who controls the United States of America? I was reading some declassified documents on Zionism sent to the FBI in the 1950s, and I wanted to share it with you guys. These letters were sent to Edgar Hoover, former director of the FBI between 1924 to 1972. In November 1916, the World Zionist Organization at London, England, submitted a proposition along the following lines to Great Britain. It proposed that the organization use its influence among the world Jewry to bring the United States of America into World War I on the side of the Allies, provided that Great Britain in exchange for this service would set aside the territory known as Palestine. So the World Zionist Organization got the US to go into World War I so they could get Palestine. Now, this letter is about a conversation in class at George Washington University in 1956 that scared somebody so much they sent it to the FBI. Last night's class was particularly heated. An American Jewish student points out the disservice done to Judaism by Zionism because it demands allegiance to Israel first. While in the Marines, some of his Jewish friends related stories of Jews who have been asked by Zionists to divulge confidential and secret information. These Zionists put pressure on American Jews by telling them that their first allegiance is to Israel. What you're hearing is these Zionists hijacked a beautiful religion called Judaism to force American Jews to commit espionage in the United States for Israel. This part is insane. This guy's Henry Lodge. He was a US ambassador. He writes a letter to the Secretary of Defense, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the FBI. He wants to outlaw the Zionist Organization of America on the charge of treason for selling the sovereignty of the United States of America. The Zionist Organization of America is operating in this republic 40 years after the parent organization conspired, bartered, and sold for a price the sovereignty of the United States of America. This loss of sovereignty has embroiled this republic in 2 world wars, and now it looks like the republic is about to be involved in a 3rd world war for the same reason. From 1920 to 1963, we have been fighting tooth and nail to get the Zionist Organization of America to register as a foreign agent. Every single time they refuse, they dissolve it, and they start up a new organization. Of course, JFK and RFK were very well aware of this, which is why they were fighting for years to get the American Zionist Council to register as a foreign agent, point where the Department of Justice gave them 72 damn hours to do it, refused, saying that such a movement would be so publicized by the American Council on Judaism that it would eventually destroy the Zionist movement. A few weeks later, JFK is somehow unalived. We all know Lee Harvey Oswald unalived JFK, and Jack Ruby then unalives Lee Harvey Oswald. The Warren Commission, not once does it ever talk about the Mossad or Israel. But of course, this article states, if you want to know about my brother Jack Ruby, you should talk to Halil Silverman. That's his rabbi. This is Halil. He actually died this year. This guy, Jack Ruby's rabbi and apparent BFF, was past president of the Zionist Organization of America. If you're president of the Zionist Organization of America and he fought in the Israel War, it seems like he'd be the kind of Zionist that would force American Jews to pledge allegiance to Israel first. And I went through his interview in the Warren Commission. He lied. He said he saw Jack Rubenstein at the synagogue on the 23rd, and then in another interview he said he didn't. And then in 2013 he lies during interview and the reporter catches him. He says that Jack Ruby says he did it for the American people. The reporter then cuts him off and he's like, no, actually Jack Ruby never said that. He said to show that the Jews had guts. And the rabbi responds and he's like, yes, he did mention that, but I don't like to mention it. I think he said I did it for the Jewish people, but I've tried to wipe wipe that statement from my mind. Just so y'all know, the narrative right now is that Jack Ruby unalived Lee Harvey Oswald because he was so mad that he unalived JFK. How does that make sense when your rabbi and apparent best friend is president of the Zionist Organization of America that JFK is literally fighting with at the time? Anyways, after JFK is unalived, the American Zionist Council escapes filing as a foreign agent and ends up becoming Aipac. Very few Americans know who Vanunu is. He's considered a traitor within Israel. He was Israel's nuclear technician. In a since deleted Jerusalem Post article that was published in 2005 that was not shown on any American media, he alleged that Jerusalem was behind the assassination of U.S. President John F. Kennedy, who was exerting pressure on the then Israeli head of state to shed light on the Dimona nuclear plant. Because separate from all this Aipac stuff, in the 1960s, JFK was in a silent war with Israel to stop them from developing their nuclear arsenal. Every FBI declassified document related to the Israeli lobby, I downloaded that shit, I fed it into a custom AI algorithm to analyze the data points and send them back to me. If you really love America, then get Aipac to register as a foreign agent in John F. Kennedy's honor.
Well, I was lucky enough today to get an extremely educational lecture from my university's foreign policy expert about Palestine, and he was talking about U.S. policy towards Israel, and he said something that I actually really agree with. And it's about how, in talking about how and why so many politicians support Israel, a lot of people will assign primary blame to Aipac. Now, obviously, Aipac does exercise very real influence on our government. But my professor was basically like, it is a mistake to think that these politicians, if they weren't receiving money from Aipac, wouldn't still be pro-Israel. He basically said that when we exaggerate Aipac's influence on U.S. politics, we try to absolve these non-Jewish politicians of their genuinely held Zionist and anti-Palestinian racist ideals. Receiving Aipac dollars is just kind of a bonus for a lot of these politicians because a lot of them are just genuinely Zionists or just genuinely, like Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi, see Israel as a strategic win. They don't need to be bribed to support Israel unilaterally. They already did that. Not to mention that our Congress, our politicians, a lot of them are just old as fuck. A lot of them carry the exact same combination of European guilt over the cost and anti-Arab racism that led to the creation of the State of Israel in the first place. So yes, Aipac is a destructive force by a foreign entity that pervades American politics, no doubt about that. But the actual root of the problem lies in the fact that our politicians are by and large morally reprehensible people.
I've said before that AIPAC has a disproportionate influence over the United States government and policy. And people have told me, Michael, that's anti-Semitic. Michael, that's unfounded. It doesn't understand nuance. And I would just like to tell you what Barack Obama said on the subject. In his latest book, Obama wrote, "Members of both parties worried about crossing the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. Those who criticize Israeli policy too loudly risked being tagged as anti-Israel and possibly anti-Semitic and confronted with a well-funded opponent in the next election. AIPAC wants a relationship where there should be no daylight between U.S. and Israeli governments, even when Israeli government took actions that were contrary to U.S. policy. Israel is the reason the United States aided Iraq and is now trying to start war with Iran."
Now, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, which is a lobbying group that advocates pro-Israel policies to the legislative and executive branches of the United States, one of several pro-Israel lobbying organizations in the United States, states that it has over 100,000 members, 17 regional offices, and a vast pool of donors. In addition, the organization has been called one of the most powerful lobbying groups in the United States. Now, until 2021, AIPAC did not raise funds for political candidates itself. Its members raise money for candidates through political action committees unaffiliated with Aipac and by other means. Now, in late 2021, Aipac formed its own political action committee. It also announced plans for a super PAC which can spend money on behalf of candidates. Its critics have stated it acts as an agent for the Israeli government with a stranglehold on the United States Congress with its power and influence. Now, Aipac has been accused of being strongly allied with the Likud Party of Israel and the Republican Party in the US. An Aipac spokesperson has called this a malicious mischaracterization. Now, the Washington Post described the perceived differences between Aipac and J Street. While both groups call themselves bipartisan, Aipac has won support from an overwhelming majority of Republican Jews, while J Street is presenting itself as an alternative for Democrats who have grown uncomfortable with both Netanyahu's policies and the conservatives flocking to Aipac. Aipac describes itself as a bipartisan organization, and the bills for which it lobbies in Congress are always jointly sponsored by both a Democrat and Republican. Aipac supporters claim its bipartisan nature can be seen at its yearly policy conference, which in 2016 included both major parties' nominees. Now, this pro-Israel lobby group is pouring millions of dollars into influencing Democratic congressional primary races to counter growing support for the Palestinian cause within the party, including elections. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee's money is focused on blocking female candidates who, if elected, are likely to align with the squad of progressive members of Congress who have been critical of Israel. But it is funneled through a group, the United Democrats Project UDP, that avoids mention of its creation by Aipac and seeks to decide elections by funding campaign messages about issues other than Israel. Aipac is taking all this money from Republican donors, and they are obfuscating the fact that they are a very Republican aligned organization while trying to persuade Democratic voters who they should support. The United Democracy Project sounds innocuous, and the advertising that they are running in these districts is about healthcare and reproductive rights and things that have nothing to do with Israel, which makes sense because those are the things that decide elections, not Israel. But the reason that they are aligning with certain candidates is because they are more aligned with their more hawkish positions on Israel, and because they fear that other candidates will be more progressive and aligned with the Palestinians. A UDP spokesperson, Patrick Doughton, said the group was doing no more than running legitimate political advertising. All we are doing is talking about candidates' public record, and that is something voters deserve to know, he said. Doughton said the group will be funding more campaigns. Our goal is to build the broad-set bipartisan coalition in Congress that supports the U.S.-Israel relationship. We are proud to support pro-Israel progressive candidates, including women of color and black people or black women. We are looking at 10 to 15 other races where there is pro-Israel candidate and a candidate that, if elected, would undermine the U.S.-Israel relationship. Despite its connections to a religious nation that emerged in antiquity, political Zionism, as we have come to encounter it, is a modern phenomenon that has its origins not as much in biblical scripture as it does in the prevalence of anti-Semitism throughout Europe, particularly in the East in the 19th century. Yet long before political Zionism gained traction within mainstream Jewish American political discourse, America offered its own distinct refuge for Jews as well as other religious minorities seeking asylum from discrimination that powerful religious institutions and emerging nation states in Europe had perpetuated. Now, during World War I, the great powers made a number of decisions concerning the future of Palestine without much regard to the wishes of the indigenous inhabitants. Palestinian Arabs, however, believed that Great Britain had promised them independence in the Hussein McMahon Correspondence, an exchange of letters from July 1915 to March 1916 between Sir Henry McMahon, British High Commissioner in Egypt, and the Emir of Mecca, in which the British made certain commitments to the Arabs in return for their support against the Ottomans during the war. Yet by May 1916, Great Britain, France, and Russia had reached an agreement, and according to which, inter alia, the bulk of Palestine was to be internationalized. Now, further complicating the situation, in November 1917, the British Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs addressed a letter to Lord Lionel Walter Rothschild, expressing sympathy for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, on the understanding that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. This declaration did not come about through an act of generosity or stirrings of conscience over the bitter fate of the Jewish people. It was meant in part to prompt American Jews to exercise their influence in moving the United States to support British post-war policies, as well as to encourage Russian Jews to keep their nation fighting. We have come to the end of the video. Please feel free to share your own take about this video. What do you have to say about it? Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video.